Welcome everyone in this new video tutorial about the multiplayer combat editor. In this video we're going to learn how to use the built-in projectile feature. So projectiles are only used by skills, and you can spawn them in any skill you'd like. And they are actors, they are actually not replicated, they are spawning on all machines. And we're going to dive right in actually. So we're going to create our own class of projectile for our project based on MCE projectiles. So let's create a new folder called projectiles, obviously. Projectile, singular. Create a new blueprint class. We want the drop-down menu of all the classes. We want to look for projectile. And we have something called BP projectile, the base class used by skill for projectile. So this is what we want. We want to create that. This is going to be the parent class of all the projectiles of our game. So we're going to call that BP my projectile. You can call that however you want. And if you open that up, it looks like this. So you have a collision, you have a model, and you have an arrow showing where is the forward of the projectile, and you have a particle system, which is a trail. And you also have the character movement, the projectile movement, I mean, where you can customize some of the settings, and some other settings are needed to be customized elsewhere. And that's where skills come into play. So you want to open up your skill behavior, so my active skill for instance, and in the class defaults you want to type in projectile, and it's asking for a base class of projectile, and you want to fill this up with your class of projectile like this. And then we're going to create we're going to spawn our first projectile. I do not want to modify that value, excuse me. So we are going to create our first projectile, but not using the class for now, at least not using a child class of this. Since we fill that value, our projectile is automatically going to be used by the skills we create, and it's going to be dynamically filled without needing to set up a child class of projectile and set up the values of the model and the fx, etc. This is the first way of spawning projectile. So let's open up any skill we have. I'm going to duplicate Furious Blow, for instance. I'm going to call that projectile, spawn projectile. Actually, I'm going to call that Fireball or Energy Blasts, let's say, because I imported a bit of Paragon Muriel, which you can download by using the marketplace, typing in Paragon. So let's open up our newly created skill Energy Blast. Let's get rid of the logic we were doing when triggering the gameplay effects. And let's not modify anything else for now. We're just going to... So this is triggering when the main effect of our animation montage is called. Let's drag a wire out of this and let's type in spawn projectile. And we want the first function. This is the first way of spawning projectiles. And it's asking for a fx. So I'm going to go over the Muriel folder, type in proj, I believe. So I want, for instance, the primary projectile of Muriel. The static mesh, I'm not going to use anything. Speed, let's say, I don't know, 250, 100. Collision size, let's say this for now. Gravity scale, I don't want any. Visual scale, I'm not going to scale the visual of my fx. And the team properties is actually what targets is the projectile supposed to hit. So we're going to drag a wire and say excuse me, and say we want to use the targets of our skill. The max distance is actually quite interesting. It's how far the projectile can go before it stops and dies. We're going to say 100 for now, or 1000 for now. And you can specify what fx it plays when it reaches its max distance. And we're going to go to the folder where we found the projectile we used, and we want to use no hit for the desfx. And we want to specify a hit and a blocking fx. So let's specify a hit and a blocking fx using hit world for the blocking fx and using hit character when founding valid targets, so when triggering the hit visual fx. And we don't want to use to display any VSFX for now. So like this. And we still need to find the right transform for our projectile, and we have a proper function called makeFriendlyTransform. And you can drag the pin out of the start transform to the spawn transform, and you can say where does it start. Does it start on the user, on the camera, or the socket? And where does it go? On the target I'm currently focusing, or on the crosshair, or the cursor, or forward the user. We're going to say crosshair. And the distance, in this case, we do not care. It's going to go forward no matter what. If you specify 0, it's going to bug, but if you specify 1, it's going to work. It only needs to know where does towards what direction it go. So this way, if we trigger that skill, it should be working. So we're going to give that skill to our third-person character. So in our third-person character, when we initialize the skills, we are actually adding a word skill, which we are going to replace by our energy blast, like this. And we're going to try out what it does. So it's actually dying. So maybe, that's quite interesting. Energy blast, if I specify 100 distance, yep, it does not change anything. And what are the targets of that skill? Enemy and neutral. So it's not dealing damage to myself. Alright, so it was a crosshair bug, apparently. Okay, so it was just going towards the ground, so it's more or less working. So when it's stopping in the air, you can see it's triggering its desfx. So it's stopping at some point. When it's hitting the world, it's actually triggering that hitfx, and when it's hitting a character, it's actually triggering the hit VSFX. So we are happy about that. We actually created our first projectile by using the built-in function to create a projectile by hand, like this. But maybe you don't want to do that. Maybe you want to use the other function, which is spawn projectile prefab, which only takes a class of projectile and a spawn transform. And why would you want to use that function over this one? Maybe because you are using the same projectiles over and over, or maybe you don't want to specify the characteristic of your projectiles when you spawn them. Maybe you want to specify the characteristics, the metrics of your projectile once at only one place in your projectile itself and not in the skill, like we are doing here. And in this case, you can by just creating a child class of your projectile. So BP my projectile, create child blueprint class, call that BP projectile energy blast, for instance. Open that up, and you can say that the trail is actually the primary projectile of Muriel, for instance. And actually, no, that's not how you are supposed to set this up, if I remember correctly. I'm just going to double check by going into, yep, we have to be calling, okay, so excuse me, go back to our projectile, to the projectile we just created. We need to go to the construction script, and we need to be calling a simple function called set projectile matrix. And you can see there are a lot of properties there are actually all the properties that we set up in our skill in there when we were spawning our projectile. But maybe you are going to use twice this projectile and you don't want to set up all the metrics in the skill, since there are two skills that are using the same projectile. And in this case, you can only do it once by setting the projectile matrix there. So we are just going to rebuild the projectile we just built by saying we want a primary, the model we don't want any, the scale is going to be 111, the speed 250, gravity scale, actually we're going to, for instance, we're going to say we have one gravity scale. Collision size, so we need to increase a bit the speed. Collision size is going to be the same we set up. Maximum distance, we are not going to set any. And targets, you can set this up by typing in, dragging a wire out of the target pin, typing in targets, bit mask I mean, and set up and say skill targets on the top right of your screen. And then you want to hit enemy and neutral. And SFX, we want Muriel, no primary, no hit, like this. And a bit of a warning there. In here, we are specifying the targets of this skill, of this projectile. And in the skill, we are specifying the targets of the projectile by using the targets of the skill directly. So if you are dynamically modifying the targets of this skill, and the skill is using a projectile, which is a prefab you created like this, the projectile spawning is not going to have the modification to the target of the skill. So maybe you'll have to modify that value by hand when spawning the projectile if you modified the targets of the skill. So we created a prefab of our projectile. So as you can see, it updated dynamically the projectile in there from the construction script when we hit compile. And the energy blast skill is now needed to spawn. We now need to specify that we want to spawn the projectile we just created, energy blast, hit compile, hit save. And now you can see there is a bit of curve because we added a gravity scale, but the speed is actually quite high, so we cannot really see the projectile going down. Yep, like this you can see. So if we switch class, if we switch team, we can hit the other player. So it's not really convenient. As you can see, it's not really a good spell to use. Maybe it should just go forward and not care about anything else. Maybe we can just tell the skill to spawn the projectile forward, from user to forward, for instance, like this. And it's going to be much easier to use the skill. It's just going to spawn forward. Honestly, it's not the game feel of the spell is really bad, but I'm just showcasing the features, you know. So let's sum up. You can spawn projectile using this node, and you build up a small friendly transform to specify where you want the skill to spawn, where you want the projectile to spawn. Or you can use that function to spawn a prefab of a projectile you created and where you set up the matrix in the construction script. So this is how you can use the projectile feature. This is how you can actually spawn projectile in MCE. So it wraps up the video. Hope you guys enjoyed it and hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.